Dawn comes slow over New Brunswick, New Jersey. The sky is milk blue above fields stubbled from late summer harvest, and the air carries the thin chill that hints at fall. Along DeRussey's Lane, a narrow road of ruts and dust, a pair of silhouettes move through the morning mist. A farmhand named Raymond Schneider and his sweetheart, Pearl Baumer. They cut along the hedgerow toward the Phillips farm orchard, chasing the privacy that young lovers always seem to need, even when the town still sleeps. Crows lift from the crabapple trees in a black, flapping startle. The grass is wet to the knee. Somewhere far off, a church bell offers a single note and lets it hang. Raymond pauses. He frowns at a shape beneath a low, knotted tree. Pearl says, voice barely above a breath, "Ray, what is that?" They step closer. The shape resolves into two. A man and a woman rest side by side, almost as if arranged for a portrait or a Sunday nap. The man's shoes are dustless, polished. The woman's dress is modest, the hem darkened by dew. There is stillness in the orchard, and something else too, something like a held breath, tight and waiting. Pearl clasps both hands to her mouth. The bird's quiet. She takes one step back, then another. Raymond crouches with a caution born of farm life, as if these two might startle like skittish colts. He notices a small, stiff rectangle near the man's hand. A calling card, damp with dew. Edward W. Hall, Rector, St. John's Episcopal Church. Pearl stares at the woman's throat and looks away in a hurry. She says only one word. Run. They run. Dust kicks from their heels as they sprint back up the lane, breath ragged in their throats. Behind them the orchard remains. The bodies remain, and the bell in town is quiet as if the clapper has been tied. Title card in the mind's eye. The Hall Mills Mystery. By mid-morning, the press is already printing. Metal plates bite paper. Ink smears the fingers of boys who hoist stacks onto wagons. New Brunswick Home News declares a double tragedy in fonts big enough to shout. The New York papers sniff the story on the wind and turn their noses toward New Jersey. Two souls in an orchard. A minister's calling card. The makings of an American scandal. St. John's Episcopal rises in red brick and stained glass not far from the river. Parishioners hover on the steps, collars turned up against a breeze that does not seem to touch the heat of their whispers. Someone says the rector has not come home. Someone else says he went out late to visit a sick man and never returned. A third lowers her voice and adds a word not often spoken in church. Affair. Across town, a modest house on a narrow street shows curtains drifting in an open window. Inside, a young girl stares at the kitchen door as if willing it to open. Her mother, Eleanor Mills, is not home. Her father, James, sits at the table with his work-rough hands folded and his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the grain of the wood as if it can answer the question in his head. Police wagons rattle toward the orchard, tires chewing dust. Detective Harry DeHart steps down from the rear and pinches the bridge of his nose. He has handled drunks and disputes and the occasional knife in an alley. He has not handled this. Two bodies side by side under a crabapple tree on a quiet September morning. The man a minister, the woman a church singer with a husband and children. He snaps instructions. Ropes go up to hold back the growing ring of onlookers. Nevertheless, the curious press forward, point, murmur, drift away with a souvenir leaf or a pressed petal tucked secretly in a pocket. The orchard breathes and watches and keeps its secrets for the moment. The bodies tell a story, but not all of it, and not clearly. Edward Hall is face up, coat neat, hands almost posed. Eleanor Mills lies close beside him, skirt folded under, shoes angled toward his. A few letters lie scattered between them, edges stained and curling. The handwriting leans forward with urgency, with longing, as if trying to step off the page and into a different life. A deputy crouches and studies the dirt. He points to a small, dark hole in the grass and another a few feet away. 4 cracks were heard in the night, someone says. A neighbor! A voice piped in from beyond the rope. Dogs barked, then silence. Detective DeHart notes the missing items. No purse for the woman, no billfold for the man. Jewelry? There and there, still in place. Not a robbery, then. The bodies are tidy except where death is not tidy. There are signs of a struggle only in the scattered letters and a torn twig. Little else speaks. DeHart lifts one letter with gloved fingers, not to read the words but to see the shape of them. The ink strokes are brave in places and trembling in others. A simple line catches the light and blur. "Till death do us part." He lowers the page and nods to an officer to collect the rest. A breeze moves through the leaves and flips a corner of paper like a page, impatient to be turned. Along the rope, a reporter scribbles, eyes sharp, hat brim low. He marks the town's mood, the mix of piety and curiosity, the thrill of scandal cutting under the skin of Sunday best. He notices a woman standing apart from the crowd. Black dress, neat as a ledger, face set. This will be Frances Stevens Hall, widow of the rector, daughter of money, nerves wound tight as piano wire. She does not weep. She does not speak. When a reporter edges near, she turns her gaze onto him, and it feels like a door shutting in his face. The message is clear. Step back. She will not play to the gallery. At the edge of the orchard, a pig farm woman named Jane Gibson leans on a fence rail and squints toward the crabapple tree. She says little today, not yet, but her eyes seem to rehearse something. 4 figures in the dark, she will claim. A cry. A woman pleading. The night holds its breath while the day burns the dew away. The town inhales the news and holds it in the chest like a shared ache. At the diner on Albany Street, cups clink against saucers and spoons make slow circles through coffee gone cold from neglect. Men talk about temptation. Women talk about danger. Someone says that New Jersey is a quiet place that prefers its sins folded away, not spread beneath a tree for every passing crow. St. John's choir loft sits empty and dusty in the late afternoon, sun-cutting bars of gold through the moats. A hymn book lies open to a familiar page, the margins traced with pencil where Eleanor once marked a high note she could never quite reach. On another page, a pressed petal has left an echo of red against the paper. This is a place of voices, and now it waits for a voice that will not return. James Mills walks home the long way, past the church where he sweeps floors and polishes brass. He has the gait of a man who wants to outrun himself. He reaches the corner and stops, hands at his sides. He looks toward the river as if it can instruct him in how to be a father and a man in the same afternoon that he becomes a widower. Reporters climb the front steps of the Hall residence, an uptown place with hedges trimmed the way money trims things. Clean, crisp, without apology. A maid answers and goes white at the sight of pads and pencils. She says the lady of the house is resting. She says it as if the phrase can cover everything. The late nights, the parish calls, the invitations that come with being prominent. Resting. Behind a second-floor window, Frances sits straight-backed at a writing desk. She moves a pen to make a list that does not need to be made. Funeral arrangements, calls to accept or to refuse. A note to her brothers. A carriage passes, then a motor car. She keeps her eyes on the desk. The world outside is a glare she does not want. Detective DeHart convenes his men in the station at dusk. Smoke hangs below the ceiling in a ragged banner. He spreads the skimpy inventory on the table. Letters retrieved. The calling card. A few small items bagged and tagged. He circles the same questions men always circle when motive hides its face. If this was a jealous rage, why the careful arrangement? If this was a cold plan, why the scattered letters? Who benefits? Who loses? Who had the nerve to take lovers by the throat and then set them down as if for a photographer's lens? An officer clears his throat and mentions the widow. Another mentions the brother-in-law, a man of means who dislikes scandal the way bankers dislike balance sheets that do not add up. A third brings up the pig farmer by the lane who claims she heard voices around midnight, pleading, then shots. Their notes do not agree on every detail, but the line is bold enough to trace. DeHart stares at the map on the wall, fingertip tapping the orchard, the lane, the road into town. He tells them to move quiet and move fast. The daylight has already worked ruin at the scene. The crowd churned the ground. Souvenirs walked away in pockets. Whatever truth remains will not be caught by bluster. It will have to be coaxed from people who do not wish to give it. Out in the cooling air, Jane Gibson sits on her porch, arms folded. Pigs shift in their pens and snort softly. She looks toward the orchard as the sky goes rose, then purple. She tries to line the night up in her head. She remembers shapes and voices, and the sudden way silence felt like a door slammed from the inside. Back at the Hall house, lamps glow behind lace. Frances descends the stairs and pauses at a table where a photograph stands in a silver frame. Edward, in clerical collar beside her, in a summer dress, on the lawn at a charity picnic. The grass was green that day, the laughter easy, the parish proud of its leader. She covers the photograph with a handkerchief and moves on. At the Mills home, a neighbor brings a casserole and grief that has the flavor of gossip. James thanks her and says little. The children sit at the small table, forks idle. The older one looks at the front door, and then at her father, and then at the door again, as if hoping the choice between the two might produce a miracle. Night returns, and with it, an uneasy hush. The orchard looks like a chapel without walls. The crabapple tree lifts its arms and holds whatever prayers the day left behind. A patrolman walks the rope line with a lantern, the yellow circle of light wagging across grass and ruts. Somewhere on the highway, a motor car passes, and its hum is a thin thread that never quite reaches here. The camera of the mind moves close. The imprint where a shoulder rested on the ground. The broken blade of grass where a heel turned. The faint scuff that suggests a quick step. Small things, all of them. Yet they stand at attention now. Ready to testify if only someone would ask the right question in the right way. In town, printing presses thunder again. Headlines swell. The story grows a spine and ribs and limbs until it becomes a creature that can stride from New Jersey to New York and beyond. Names climb onto the front page and into parlors where people read aloud after supper. Some voices are solemn. Others tingle with the cheap thrill that attends other people's ruin. In the station, DeHart pencils a list on a legal pad. He writes, timeline, witnesses, weapons, alibis. He underlines witnesses twice. He writes one more word a little apart from the others. Truth. Morning again. Men with cameras pose by the orchard fence, hats set just so, as if opinion can be photographed. A county official announces that autopsies have begun. Rumor runs 3 steps ahead, reporting what no one can yet know. Shots at close range. A throat cut. 4 casings, perhaps. Perhaps not. The ground has been stirred like batter. At St. John's, the pews fill. The congregation sings with a wavering that does not feel like reverence. They want comfort and spectacle both, and the church can only provide one. A deacon reads from a psalm about walking through the valley, and a woman in the second row sobs once, loud and helpless, before clapping a hand over her mouth. The sound echoes against stone and wood, and the silence that follows is worse. Outside the church, a reporter asks a parishioner if the rector kept late hours. The man adjusts his hat and says the rector was devoted to his flock. The reporter asks if he was devoted to one member more than others. The man's face tightens. He turns away. The reporter writes anyway. Back at the Hall residence, Frances receives a visitor. Her brother steps into the parlor, a man in a tailored suit with the alert stillness of someone who counts money by listening to it. He hands her a letter from a family attorney before she even asks. He says they will cooperate fully. He says they will not be made into a circus act. He says the world is cruel when it senses vulnerability. She nods. Her hands lie folded in her lap without tremor. Across town, James Mills signs a form at the station with a slow hand. He answers what he can and refuses what he must. He keeps his eyes level. He uses short sentences. He leaves with his hat in his hands, as if he has borrowed it from a man who knows more about dignity than he does. The camera returns to the orchard, for one last glance at the place where everything tilted. The morning breeze has freshened. Leaves chatter. Sun slices through branches and sparkles on the dewdrops that cling to grass like beads on a costly dress. Somewhere a cow lows. Somewhere a child calls for a dog. A small piece of paper, damp and stubborn, clings to the roots at the base of the crabapple tree. A gloved hand reaches down and lifts it. The handwriting is clear, the lines slanted and urgent. Words leap up, charged with the private electricity of longing that dared hope for a different life. The officer slides the page into an envelope and seals it. Detective DeHart watches from a few paces off. He thinks of the church and the choir loft and the homes divided now into halves. One half where breath continues, one half where it has stopped forever. He thinks of New Brunswick and of all the towns like it across America, where people lean on picket fences and talk quietly to avoid saying the one thing they cannot avoid thinking. If love is a promise, then jealousy is a law, and both are cruel when they are broken. He turns to his men. The orders are simple. Speak to the widow. Speak to the husband. Speak to the woman on the farm who says she heard 4 shots in the dark and a voice pleading. Find the weapon. Find the trail that boots make when they hurry away from what they have done. The orchard keeps its counsel, but not forever. The first 10 minutes of this story have put the town on edge, set the press in motion, and placed 2 names on everyone's tongue. Edward Hall, priest and husband, Eleanor Mills, singer and wife. Now the questions arrive, sharp as the chill in the air. Who stood among the trees and raised a gun? Who arranged the bodies as if love could be made polite after violence? Who tidied the scene and left the letters like a proclamation? The camera pulls back. The road lies open. The bell in town begins to ring the hour, measured and slow. New Brunswick will not be quiet again for a long time. The church bells ring clear over New Brunswick. It's a warm Sunday morning, the kind that makes the air hum with the smell of lilacs and polished wood. Inside St. John's Episcopal, sunlight filters through colored glass, painting long ribbons of blue and gold across the pews. The congregation rises to sing. The organ swells. At the pulpit, Reverend Edward Hall speaks with calm conviction. His voice carries the rhythm of a man who believes in what he says, or wants to. He talks about love, sacrifice, and the courage to live truthfully. Parishioners nod along, women dab their eyes, and a few glance up at the man who has become the soul of this town's faith. In the choir loft, Eleanor Mills sings softly, her voice tender and pure. Her eyes lift to the pulpit now and then, and when they do, Edward's gaze catches hers for the smallest instant. It's nothing that anyone else might notice, but in that moment, they both know the truth of it. It's a dangerous kind of truth, the kind that makes the air feel heavier. After the service, the congregation spills into the courtyard. Children laugh, men discuss the price of coal. Women exchange compliments and gossip in equal measure. Edward steps out into the sunlight, smiling at his parishioners. Eleanor lingers near the gate, pretending to tie her shawl tighter, waiting. Their eyes meet again, brief, silent, electric. Evening falls over the small Mills house on Nickel Avenue. The neighborhood smells of cooking and coal smoke. Inside, Eleanor Mills hums as she wipes the supper dishes. Her husband, James Mills, sits at the table bent over the newspaper. He's a church sexton, quiet, hard-working, and older than his wife. He doesn't look up much when she speaks. Their children, Charlotte and Daniel, do homework by lamplight. It's an ordinary family scene, but beneath it hums tension, the kind that sits unspoken between people who have already grown apart. Eleanor glances toward the small clock on the shelf. 8:15. She puts the towel down and steps outside for fresh air, as she calls it. On the porch, she pulls a small folded paper from her apron, a letter written in a careful, educated hand. She reads the words silently, lips trembling between guilt and longing. There are moments when I feel heaven closer to you than to any church I've ever stood in. She folds it back neatly and tucks it inside her dress before going in. James watches her from the table but says nothing. At the Hall residence on George Street, the evening lamp burns late. Reverend Hall sits at his desk surrounded by papers, parish records, and letters. The room is neat, but the order feels forced. He looks tired. The kind of tired that comes not from work, but from carrying something heavy in the heart. On the desk, a letter lies open. The handwriting is feminine, flowing. He reads a line, then places it face down. He leans back and rubs his temple. Across the room, Frances Hall enters. She's dressed impeccably, hair pinned, posture straight, eyes sharp. Her presence fills the space before her voice does. She comments on how late he's working, her tone even but weighted. Edward smiles faintly, a smile meant to soothe. He tells her the parish needs him more these days. More counseling, more visits, more time with the choir. She looks at him for a long, still moment. The silence stretches, long enough for both of them to understand what's not being said. She turns, smooths her dress, and leaves the room without another word. The door closes quietly, but it sounds final. The next afternoon, the choir gathers for rehearsal. The small church smells of candle wax and sheet music. Eleanor arrives with her songbook, cheeks flushed, hair pinned carefully. Reverend Hall greets each singer politely, until their eyes meet. Then everything else fades a little. As they practice, he walks between the pews, giving soft instructions. When he passes Eleanor, their shoulders nearly touch. A hymn begins, "Abide with Me." Their voices blend perfectly, his deep baritone under hers, the harmony smooth as breath. When practice ends, the others file out. Eleanor lingers, pretending to gather her things. Edward stays behind to blow out the candles. For a moment they are alone in the quiet sanctuary. Eleanor whispers that she's afraid someone will notice. Edward steps closer, his voice low. He says their affection is not sin, only misunderstood. The sound of his words and the faint echo of footsteps in the hall merge. Someone approaches. They step apart just as Frances Hall appears in the doorway. Her expression is calm. Too calm. She says she forgot her shawl from the morning service. She retrieves it from the pew, glances once between them, then leaves. Neither Eleanor nor Edward speaks for several seconds. The tension is enough to chill the air around them. Later that night, Edward sits alone at his desk again. He takes out his stationery and begins to write. "Dearest, there are forces around us that do not wish for our happiness. But I cannot let fear rule me. We will speak soon, in the orchard, where the air is ours." He folds the paper and seals it with care. A knock comes at the door. It's his wife's brother, Willie Stevens, dressed in his usual black coat, hat in hand. He tells Edward that Frances is upset, that rumors are spreading, that discretion must be maintained. Edward nods politely, hides the letter under a book, and says he appreciates the concern. When Willie leaves, Edward leans back, exhales deeply, and looks toward the dark window. His reflection stares back. The image of a man both holy and human, trapped between two worlds. A few days later, Eleanor visits the post office on Albany Street. The sun is sharp overhead. She hands a small envelope to the clerk. The same letter Edward wrote, now returned with her reply enclosed. Her handwriting is strong, defiant. She walks out of the post office and heads toward the river path. The city hums with life. Streetcars clatter, children shout, church bells ring the hour. But in Eleanor's head, there's only the echo of his voice. She knows the risk. She knows what people will say. But she's tired of living by everyone else's rules. As she walks, she passes two women who stop talking when they see her. Their eyes follow her until she disappears around the corner. Gossip travels faster than letters in this town. Frances Hall sits in her garden with tea, a picture of composure. A maid trims roses nearby. The newspaper lies folded beside her. Front page. Rumors of scandal surround Rector's church. Her jaw tightens. She's a woman raised in old New Jersey money, taught that appearances are currency. She will not let her family's name dissolve into ridicule, but behind her calm demeanor, something darker stirs. Humiliation, fear, and the creeping suspicion that she already knows the truth. She calls for her brothers that evening. They arrive before sundown. Willie, cautious and practical. Henry, short-tempered, always looking for control. They talk behind closed doors, the kind of talk that smells of strategy, not sorrow. Outside, the servants exchange glances. They've seen enough in that house to know when something serious brews. Night falls over New Brunswick again. In her small kitchen, Eleanor sits by the lamp writing one final letter. She tells Edward she cannot bear to hide any more, that love, once alive, should not have to apologize for existing. Meanwhile, at the Hall residence, Frances stands at her window watching the street. Edward leaves the house with his hat and walking stick. She doesn't move, doesn't speak. She just watches until he turns the corner. Her fingers tighten on the curtain fabric until her knuckles go white. At St. John's, the wind hums through the empty bell tower. The choir loft sits silent. On the rector's desk, a note lies half-finished. Words about duty, love, and forgiveness. The ink has not yet dried. The town sleeps under a heavy sky. Clouds hang low, pressing against the rooftops. In the darkness, two figures move quietly along a lane outside town. One man, one woman. They walk side by side toward the orchard. Their voices are faint, carried off by the wind. A dog barks in the distance, then stops. Somewhere far behind, another set of footsteps begins to follow, steady, deliberate, keeping its distance. The screen fades to black. A single cricket chirps. Evening pulls a gray shawl over New Brunswick. Heat from the day bleeds off the road, and the hedgerows breathe out the smell of earth and apple skin. A red sun smolders low behind the tree line as Edward Hall turns off George Street and makes for the quieter lanes outside town. Hat set square, coat buttoned despite the warmth, he keeps a steady pace that suggests intention rather than leisure. Eleanor Mills leaves her small house a few minutes later. She pauses on the porch to listen for her children's voices in the parlor, hears laughter, hears the scratch of a pen on homework. The neighbor has agreed to sit with them. Eleanor closes the door softly and steps into the last light of the day, shawl tight, head down. The town attenuates behind them. Clatter of a streetcar, a final burst of chatter from a shop door, then the plain music of crickets. Both take the footpath that skirts the Phillips farm. Between hedges the air cools, and the first star blinks awake above the orchards. They meet at the break in the fence where a board has been pried back and not quite replaced. He lifts the board with one hand. She slips through, her skirt brushing the grass. They do not embrace. They stand close in the half-light, shoulders nearly touching, letting the quiet knit a small shelter around them. They move deeper into the orchard. The crabapple trees lean like old parishioners over a secret. The ground slopes to a little hollow where the world feels farther away. Edward removes his hat and rests it on a low branch. Eleanor sits, then lies back to watch the sky open into indigo. She tells him she is tired of hiding. He says he understands. She asks what understanding can do against the weight of a town. He says the future can be made, even here. The words are careful, almost formal, as if the shape of them matters as much as the meaning. A soft wind carries the faintest echo of a bell from town. Edward reaches for her hand, and she lets him take it. Somewhere beyond the fence, a twig gives a tiny snap, the kind that might be a rabbit, might be nothing at all. Neither looks up. On a rise not far off, Jane Gibson tends to her pigs and listens to the night. She is used to sorting field sounds from trouble sounds. Tonight, something in the rhythm of the quiet is off. She leans on the fence and stares toward Derussi's lane, where the trees clump dark against the dim sky. A dog barks, then barks again, a warning voice rather than a playful one. Jane hears feet on the lane. One set is quick and light, then stops. Another, slower, deliberate. She cannot see faces, only shapes, but she counts more than two. Down the road, a farm couple climbs into bed and leaves the window open to the September air. The wife mentions voices she cannot quite make out. The husband says it is only boys trespassing for apples. They trade the easy reassurances that keep small towns from coming apart after dark. Back in the hollow, the lovers sit close, shoulders touching. Edward speaks of letters that should be burned and promises that should be kept. Eleanor murmurs that keeping one will mean losing the other. A footstep interrupts them. Not a rustle. A footstep. Measured. Heavy. Two silhouettes gather at the edge of lantern distance. Then a third. The orchard seems to hold its breath the way a congregation does when it senses a confession coming. Eleanor's hand tightens around Edward's. He stands. Voices come low and clipped. No need to linger on words. The sense is clear. End this. Leave this place. Think of your vows. Think of your name. Eleanor draws herself up with dignity that is all spine and no apology. The space between the groups hums. A pocket of silence swells and swallows the last cricket chirp. A spark in the dark as metal catches stray moonlight. Someone inhales sharply. Edward moves half a step, a reflex more protective than brave. Eleanor's breath snags. The night shatters. First shot. Close. A flare, a boom. The smell of hot powder. Birds lift out of the trees in a ragged burst and spill into the sky. Edward stumbles, catches himself, eyes startled wide as if he has heard a name called from a great distance. Second shot, nearer. Eleanor gasps and goes to her knees, one hand on the ground as if to steady the whole orchard. The shapes at the edge of the hollow blur as they hunch or flinch or press forward. Third shot, an answer to panic. The sound rolls along the hedgerow and bounces off the lane. Somewhere a horse stamps in its stall. Somewhere a window shade snaps up. Fourth shot, final as a period. Then, for a heartbeat. Nothing but the scrape of a heel and the thin wheeze of someone who cannot get enough air. The gun sinks from sight. The air stinks of brass and smoke and fear. Leaves continue to fall as if nothing has happened at all. Jane Gibson hears the sequence and counts it without wanting to. She calls for her boy, tells him to stay inside, and snatches up the small lantern by the door, though she does not yet dare to light it. She strains to separate voices from the churned-up quiet. One voice is pleading, a woman. Another voice is low and firm. Commands, not comfort. Back in the hollow, movement changes from frantic to precise. Hands work in the dark, with the calm of people who have practiced putting things back into order. A hat is retrieved, then placed again. A walking stick is examined, then set aside. A small square of paper flutters in the grass and is picked up, considered, and let go. The woman's body is drawn nearer to the man's, as if closeness can amend what has been done. Fingers are arranged. A skirt is tugged smooth. The arrangement is less tenderness than statement, something meant to be seen, meant to inform the world what the world is supposed to conclude. A knife flashes once with a small wet sound. The night receives it without protest. The silence after is worse than the noise before. When it is finished, the figures recede, careful where they place their weight. One steps wide to avoid soft ground. Another rubs at a sleeve as if to erase a stain. Someone whispers, "Hurry." Another answers, "Do not run." The orchard holds their passing like a secret it does not promise to keep. On DeRussi's lane, a motor car coughs to life, then thinks better of the noise and clicks into a lower timbre, pulling away slow. Far behind, a lantern winks on and off twice, a signal or a stutter, impossible to say. Jane Gibson finally lights her lantern and steps 2 paces down from the porch, then stops. She has seen enough dusk harvests to know when a field is safe and when it is not. She waits and listens until even the air seems to tire of carrying whispers. A thin gray dawn curls into the trees and lays a gentle color over everything. Dew clings to the blades of grass like 1,000 small confessions. The lovers lie side by side, faces soft in the forgiving light that always comes too late. A paper corner stirs at the base of the crabapple tree, a scrap that escaped tidying hands. Ink has bled into the fibers where the dew found it. Words can still be made out if someone cares to kneel. "Till death do us part" lies like a dare between them and the day. A cricket ticks once, then goes quiet. The orchard returns to its ordinary work of ripening and falling, as if it has not witnessed the worst that people do to themselves in the name of love and pride. Before anyone finds the bodies, the town stirs. A milk wagon rattles up Albany Street. A child runs a block and back to prove the leg's work. At St. John's, A sexton unlocks the side door and inhales the cool nave air. He pauses by the rector's office, notices the half-dried ink on a note that mentions duty and forgiveness, and tells himself it is none of his business. At the Hall residence, Frances sits upright in a chair she never quite left through the night. The house is silent in the way houses are when staff keep to the back stairs, and the mistress of the home does not ring for breakfast. She looks at a clock that insists the hour has arrived for ordinary life to resume, and decides the clock is wrong. At the Mills home, Charlotte shakes her brother awake and asks if Mama came back while they were sleeping. He says he thinks he heard the door once, though he probably did not. They look at their father, already dressed for work, jaw set like a locked drawer. He tells them to wash up. He does not look at the empty chair. Raymond Schneider lopes along the lane with Pearl Balmer beside him, two figures cut out of morning mist. They laugh softly at nothing and everything because bodies do that when night finally lets go, and day feels like a promise. Raymond carries a walking stick he found last week and spins it once, twice, as if the world is only games and sticks and the good weight of legs under you. They reach the break in the fence and duck through, careless with the kind of innocence that believes orchards are for kissing, and apples and secrets that bloom into happy stories. They step into the hollow and stop. The day tips. Pearl's breath leaves her all at once, the way air rushes out of a room when a door slams. Raymond stares at the calling card near the man's hand, at the meticulous lay of the bodies, at the letters resting like fallen leaves between them. Understanding does not arrive. It simply exists, full and cold. Pearl says one word that carries every other word inside it. Run. They run, and DeRussi's lane wakes to the commotion of a town about to be broken open. Somewhere in that small pause between discovery and alarm, the orchard exhales. It has held the night as long as it can. Now it releases what it knows to the hands of men who will try to read it like scripture and end up arguing over the margins. The first siren of the day wails through New Brunswick, sharp and dissonant. By the time detectives reach the orchard, word has already spread. Reporters, farmers, and half the parish stand behind the rope line before breakfast. The sun climbs over the trees, cold and uncaring. Detective Harry DeHart takes off his hat and stares at the scene. The bodies have been photographed, catalogued, and finally lifted onto stretchers. He notes the careful arrangement, the open letters, the bullet holes, the slash across the woman's throat, the absence of footprints that should be there, and the abundance of others that shouldn't. He murmurs to his deputy, "Someone wanted this to be found." By noon, every paper from Trenton to New York City has the story. The New Brunswick Home News prints, "Church rector and choir singer found dead in orchard." The tabloids sharpen it further. "Love, lies, and murder beneath the apple trees." Boys shout headlines at street corners. Photographers crowd the steps of St. John's Church. Parishioners who came for comfort leave whispering, half believing the devil has moved into town. In his office, DeHart watches a reporter sketch the orchard from memory. He warns them not to print rumors. They print them anyway. The Hall residence on George Street becomes a fortress, curtains drawn. No visitors allowed. Inside, Frances Hall sits between her brothers, Willie and Henry Stevens. Frances is pale but composed. She asks if there's news. Henry, pacing, says the police have no proof but plenty of curiosity. Willie advises silence, always the cautious one. Frances sips her tea, eyes fixed on nothing. Finally, she says, "They will not ruin his name." "Not while I'm alive," Willie nods. "Then we must be careful what we say, and what we do not." Outside, a cluster of reporters gather at the gate. One shouts her name. Another holds up a camera. She turns her face away and closes the curtains. Detective DeHart drives out to the Gibson farm on the edge of town. The property smells of hay, mud, and pigs. Jane Gibson, a tall woman in worn boots, waits on the porch, a kerchief tied around her hair. DeHart asks what she saw that night. Jane tells him she was tending to her animals when she heard voices from the orchard. 2 women, 2 men, then a cry, then 4 shots. He presses for details, faces, distance, accents. She hesitates. Couldn't see much. The moon was behind the trees. Still, she insists there was a woman shouting, begging, and another voice saying, "You'll pay for this." DeHart writes every word down, though he's unsure which ones to believe. As he leaves, Jane calls after him, "You'll find her throat was cut. I heard the scream stop that way." He stops, looks back, and simply nods. By the third day, New Brunswick feels like a stage lit too brightly. At the diner, people whisper theories over coffee. At the barber shop, men debate whether the widow could do such a thing. At the church, candles burn for two souls, though half the town thinks only one deserves saving. Detective DeHart walks the streets, tired eyes hidden under the brim of his hat. Every person he meets has a story, and every story contradicts the last. He stops by the Mills home. James Mills opens the door, face hollow. DeHart offers condolences. James nods, thanks him, then adds quietly, "If you find who did this, tell them I forgive them. But I'd still like to see their face." DeHart notes the tremor in his hands before leaving. At the police station, chaos reigns. Evidence bags pile on desks. Bullets, letters, fabric fibers. A revolver turned in by a hunter that turns out to be the wrong caliber. One photograph shows a footprint near the fence, but by the time DeHart revisits the orchard, the prints are gone, trampled by curiosity seekers and newspaper men. The autopsy reports arrive. 4 bullets, one through the head, one through the chest, 2 grazing wounds. The woman's throat cut post-mortem. The conclusion, premeditated, not a robbery. DeHart lights a cigarette and mutters, "Someone wanted them punished, not just dead." By week's end, New Brunswick looks more like a movie set than a town. Cameras flash. Reporters in fedoras chase any quote they can twist. A journalist from New York's Daily Mirror claims the widow hired killers. Another from the Evening World writes that the lovers planned to elope that very night. DeHart knows half of it is nonsense, but the noise drowns out truth. He warns the mayor that the investigation is slipping from his hands. The mayor sighs. "It's already gone, Harry. The case belongs to the papers now." At night, Frances Hall walks her darkened house, the creak of each floorboard echoing through empty rooms. She stops at her husband's study, where the faint scent of ink and pipe smoke still lingers. On his desk lies an open Bible, the verse underlined in red. "The wages of sin is death." Her hand trembles as she closes the book. Elsewhere, Jane Gibson's story spreads like wildfire. Some call her brave, others call her mad. Each retelling changes something: the distance she stood, the number of voices she heard. But every version keeps one image the same: the woman in black, shouting, then silence. Detective DeHart sits alone in his office past midnight, pinned to the wall behind him. Photographs of the orchard, sketches of footprints, letters written in delicate cursive. He draws lines between them like a web, connecting Edward Hall to Eleanor Mills, to Frances, to the Stevens brothers. He whispers to himself, "It always comes back to that house." Outside, thunder grumbles across the river. Rain begins to fall, washing the streets clean of dust and rumor, but not of guilt. DeHart knows that somewhere in New Brunswick, someone sleeps soundly, convinced they've gotten away with murder. He takes a long drag from his cigarette, stares out the rain-streaked window and mutters, "Not forever." Winter, 1926. Snow piles along the sidewalks of New Brunswick like ghosts refusing to leave. The town that once whispered about the orchard has gone quiet, until word spreads. Frances Hall and her brothers, Willie and Henry Stevens, are to stand trial for the murders of Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills. Detective Harry DeHart, older now, lines deep around his eyes, reads the news on his desk. The headline screams, "Hall widow indicted, orchard murders return to haunt New Jersey." He sets the paper down slowly. 4 years of silence, and now the story breathes again. New Brunswick Courthouse. December. Reporters flood the steps, their camera bulbs bursting like fireworks. Spectators queue before dawn just to glimpse the infamous widow. Vendors sell coffee and cheap pamphlets promising secrets of the orchard lovers. Inside, the courtroom buzzes. The judge takes his seat. Jurors whisper. The crowd hushes as the doors open and Frances Hall enters, dressed in black with a fur collar. Her chin high, her composure flawless. The Stevens brothers follow, both stiff and pale. The prosecutor, Alexander Simpson, rises to speak. He declares this is not merely a trial of murder, but a trial of morality, power, and deceit. The defense, led by Timothy Nolte, counters coolly, "This case is built on rumor, not evidence." And so it begins. All eyes turn to the side door as Jane Gibson enters. 4 years have turned her from a local oddity into a national headline. The Pig Woman. She limps slightly, wrapped in a heavy coat, and clutches a handkerchief. The crowd leans forward as she raises her right hand to swear in. Her voice trembles at first. She says she saw the crime that night. 2 men, 2 women, shadows moving among the apple trees. A shout, a plea, 4 shots, and a scream cut short. The prosecutor presses her to describe the woman's voice. Jane says it was high, angry, sharp, like a woman scolding a child. He asks if she could tell who it was. Jane hesitates. The room leans in. "I believe it was Mrs. Hall." Gasps ripple through the courtroom. Reporters scribble furiously. Then the defense rises for cross-examination. They pick at every detail. The distance she stood, the darkness, the moonlight, her memory after so many years. "Can you even swear what night you saw it?" Nolte asks. Jane's lips press tight. "It was the night they died," she says. Laughter breaks out from the back of the courtroom. The judge bangs his gavel for silence. For days, the prosecution tries to rebuild the case. The letters, the autopsy, the jealous motive, the testimony of servants who claim they heard arguments in the Hall house. But every piece feels fragile. The letters were public long ago, handled by too many hands. The bullets don't match any known weapon. The supposed footprints at the orchard were trampled before police arrived. And the motive? Love, jealousy, pride, all circumstantial, all hearsay. When the prosecutor reads one of Eleanor's letters aloud in court, "My heart lives only for you," Frances Hall sits stone still, her gloved hands folded on her lap. Attorney Nolte turns the trial into theater. He calls Frances Hall's servants, who testify that she was home the night of the murder. He points to the lack of physical evidence. No weapon, no blood, no fingerprints, no confession. He paints Jane Gibson as unreliable, perhaps even delusional. "She's built herself a story," he tells the jury, "and the press built her a throne." He ends his summation with quiet force. "If these defendants are guilty, then show me how. Show me one single piece of proof not built from gossip or ink. Justice demands evidence, not entertainment." His words hang heavy in the courtroom air. Outside, crowds gather in the cold, stamping their feet for warmth. Vendors sell cigarettes and roasted chestnuts. Inside, the jury retires to deliberate. Hours stretch into a day. Then another. DeHart stands by the railing, watching through the glass doors as reporters pace like wolves. Finally, the jury returns. 12 men, faces drawn and solemn. The foreman stands. The clerk reads the verdict. Frances Hall, not guilty. Willie Stevens, not guilty. Henry Stevens, not guilty. The words echo through the chamber like hollow bells. Frances Hall closes her eyes. Her brothers nod once, as if accepting a business deal. Jane Gibson weeps openly. Detective DeHart exhales, not in relief but in exhaustion. The judge bangs the gavel one last time. The case is closed. Outside, the crowd roars. Some cheer for justice served. Others shout that money bought freedom. Snow begins to fall again, gentle, indifferent. Reporters run to telephones, sending headlines to every corner of America. Hall widow walks free, mystery still unsolved. DeHart walks down the courthouse steps, coat collar high against the cold. A young reporter stops him, notebook ready. "Detective, do you think they did it?" DeHart looks past him toward the horizon. "I think 2 people died for love," he says, "and 3 more will live with it." He walks on, disappearing into the swirl of snow. Weeks later, the Hall mansion is quiet again. Frances sits by the window, staring at the bare orchard visible in the distance. She has been acquitted, but the town will never forgive, never forget. She whispers to herself, "They all think they know, but only God does." A servant enters to light the fire, and for a brief moment, the room glows with warmth, then fades back into shadow. A series of images unfold, slow and haunting. Jane Gibson walking her farm, staring toward the horizon, alone. James Mills leading his children down Albany Street, heads bowed. St. John's Church, its pews half empty, its choir silent. The orchard at twilight, wind moving through the branches. A voiceover, perhaps DeHart's, closes the act. The Hall Mills murders became legend, a tangle of love and lies that no jury could unravel. Time buried the truth beneath gossip and pride. Some say justice was never served. Others say it was never possible. But the orchard still remembers. The trees still whisper when the wind passes through. Snow drapes over New Brunswick like a sheet on a forgotten bed. The town that once shouted its theories into every newspaper has fallen into silence. The courthouse stands empty, its echoes gone. The orchard sleeps beneath frost. The crabapple trees bare, their branches skeletal against the pale sky. Detective Harry DeHart stands alone at the fence line. His breath fogs the cold air as he looks at the spot where the bodies were found 4 years earlier. The grass is gone, replaced by winter weeds and snow. He lights a cigarette and speaks to no one in particular. 4 bullets, a blade, and a town full of ghosts. The wind doesn't answer. It never does. He takes one last look at the trees, flicks the cigarette into the snow, and walks away. A few miles away, Jane Gibson sits by a small wood stove in her farmhouse. The pigs are gone now, sold, the farm falling into disrepair. She coughs into a handkerchief and mutters to herself about how no one believed her. Reporters stopped visiting long ago. Her son brings her tea. She says she still hears things at night. Gunshots, a woman crying, the same plea that never leaves her ears. He tells her it's just the wind, but Jane knows better. She points toward the orchard and whispers, "That place never went quiet." People just stopped listening. In the Hall mansion, the rooms echo with emptiness. The servants are gone. The curtains remain closed. The once bustling home now feels like a museum to pride and sorrow. Frances Hall sits in her husband's study, the fireplace unlit. A photograph of Edward rests on the desk beside a Bible worn from years of handling but rarely reading. She opens the Bible to the marked verse, "Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord," she whispers, barely audible. "Then let it be his." Outside, the trees sway in the winter wind. Her reflection in the window merges with the snow-covered orchard beyond. A woman and her ghosts, blurred together by time. On Nickel Avenue, the Mills children walk home from school. Their mother's name still floats in whispers when they pass. Teachers grow quiet mid-sentence. Their father, James, works longer hours at the church, sweeping, mending, polishing the brass altar until it gleams. One Sunday, he sits alone in the back pew after the service. The choir sings without Eleanor now, a thinner sound, less alive. He bows his head, and the tears fall silently. Not from anger anymore, but from the dull ache of something that will never make sense. When the last hymn fades, he stands, straightens his jacket, and locks the church door behind him. Weeks later, in his small office, DeHart types his final notes before retirement. The case file, thick, heavy, and unfinished, sits open beside him. He types, "After 4 years of investigation, trial, and public speculation, the truth remains uncertain. Evidence insufficient. Motives speculative. Witness credibility compromised. Public opinion divided. Justice inconclusive." He stops typing. Looks out the window. The typewriter waits for the last line. Finally, he adds, "Case closed, but never solved." He pulls the final page from the typewriter, signs it, and places it in the folder. Then he locks the file cabinet. The click of the lock sounds final. Montage: the orchard in spring. Green. New, beautiful, pretending not to remember. Children playing nearby, never knowing what lies beneath the soil. Newspapers yellowing in attic boxes, headlines fading with time. The Hall mansion boarded up, Jane Gibson's farmhouse collapsing under ivy and dust. Time rolls forward. The world changes. Cars get faster, clothes get shorter, faith grows quieter. But in New Brunswick, locals still tell the story of the lovers in the orchard. Cut to the 1970s. A group of college students from Rutgers University visits the old orchard site for a history project. They laugh, take photos, read from old clippings. One girl, curious, wanders a little farther from the group. She kneels near a gnarled tree trunk and finds a rusted piece of jewelry half buried in the soil. A locket, bent and faded, but with two tiny initials barely visible. E.M. She shows it to her friends. They shrug it off as coincidence. They leave, still joking, not realizing what they've touched. The camera lingers on the locket in her hand. The faint outline of two lovers engraved inside, their faces worn away by time. Fade to present day. Archival photographs appear. The orchard, the trial, the crowds, the faces of people long gone. A narrator's voice overlays the images. The Hall Mills murders remain one of America's great unsolved cases. A tragedy tangled in class, love and the silence of privilege. Every theory has been told, every confession imagined. But the truth, whatever it was, stayed in that orchard. Maybe buried under the roots, maybe whispered through the leaves. Some say justice never came. Others say justice was never wanted. As the words fade, the camera returns to the orchard. Modern now, still and empty. The trees grown older but standing tall. The wind picks up, carrying faint sounds. A woman's laugh, a gunshot echo, a rustle of paper like letters caught in the breeze. Evening again. The sky bleeds gold over New Brunswick. The camera slowly pans down to the same crabapple tree from Act 1, the silent witness of everything. The last light of the sun glints off the snow where the two bodies once lay. There are no graves, no markers, just the faint whisper of wind and memory. Text fades onto the screen. The Hall Mills murders were never solved. The true killer, or killers, were never found. The case remains open in history, closed in justice. A final beat of silence. Then a single church bell tolls once,